god, this is ridiculous. What's up guys? Today we're going to be installing and testing Koni active shocks on my 2014 BMW 328D. These also used to be called Koni FSD, which stands for Frequency Select Damping, and basically they use a different valving technology inside the shock that supposedly makes it more comfortable over rough roads, while at the same time making them firmer and more sporty on smooth roads. They actually even use an almost identical F31 like mine in their marketing videos. Now, they do cost a bit more than double the standard OE replacement shocks, so we're going to put them to the test, and at the same time while we're in there, we're going to do control arms and a couple of other things. Here's everything. Obviously we've got the 4 shocks, all the hardware, mounts, bump stops, dust boots, all new sway bar end links, and then in the rear we've also got the lower control arm and a tow arm as well. All right, let's start by taking this wheel off. Oh, maybe. Big old run flat. And well, I mean, you don't have to be any kind of expert to see that this thing is not in good shape. It's leaking all over the place. I mean, it was leaking so bad at one point that I actually found a puddle of strut fluid in my driveway. The dust boots ripped. I mean, everything is just absolutely destroyed. To be expected, the car has over 320,000 kilometers on it, and these are the originals. Now we got to get this entire strut assembly out, and then at the same time, we're going to do a little bit of work on some of the surrounding components, like for example, replacing the sway bar end links. This one actually doesn't have anything wrong with it, but again, with over 320,000 kilometers on the car, we're going to make everything like brand new. Now to actually get the strut out, it's a bit more work than you might expect. We've got to disconnect the axle, the thrust arm, the tie rod, the sway bar end link, and according to the service manual, they actually want us to remove the wishbone as well, but I always leave that connected. That way we can kind of just tilt everything forward and remove it that way. So we'll start with this axle bolt. The tie rod is a 21. So we got pretty lucky on this one because I was able to remove it with the impact. Normally what happens is as you start to back this nut off, it gets stuck on all the corrosion at the top of the threads here, and then the entire ball joint starts to spin on itself. Otherwise, there is a T30 or 40 down in here that you can use to counter hold while you use a wrench, but usually by the time you need to do that, these are too rusted and stripped out for it to be any use. To disconnect the thrust arm, I find it easier to unbolt it from the bushing side rather than the ball joint side. We've just got to remove this splash shield here. Now this should come right off. Now we should be able to take this right out. And let this whole thing drop down. Okay, now same thing here for the sway bar. Wipe off some of this corrosion so that this nut doesn't get stuck on the stud. Bit of penetrating oil. Pull down on the sway bar and we can yank this right out. Now with everything except the wishbone removed, we can undo the pinch bolt. So this bolt side is an 18 and the nut side on the back is a 16. That was easy. Now I'll just break some of this corrosion free. Nice. And then to open up the knuckle here, I'm going to use one of these knuckle spreader tools. So the way it works is you just put it in straight and then turn it. As it turns, as you can see, it's kind of oval shaped. That's going to stretch it open, and then this entire thing will slide down and the strut will stay here. There we go. And a bit of banging. And you can see it's already starting to come free. Before you get too far into removing it, you just want to pay attention to wherever you're working. If you're on the ground, just make sure that you have something underneath ready to catch this, because once this knuckle comes off of this shock, there's nothing left holding the brake rotor, the caliper, the control arms, the axle, all that into the car, so it's going to come right down. So as you can see, this is what I meant by the entire knuckle falls right down, so make sure you got something to support it. Nothing's under too much tension here. Okay, I think that's good. Now remove the 3 bolts at the top. Okay. And that is the entire assembly. What a mess. So here's the old crusty strut assembly, and then everything we need to make a brand new one. Normally, at the very least, you can transfer over the spring, but due to the corrosion on the car, I got replacements. These are used stock springs, and I have absolutely no interest in lowering a daily driver, especially where I live. And so long as they're not too rusted or cracked, springs don't really go bad, so you could reuse them if you want to. I also sprayed this Cosmoline RP342 on them. One day I'll make a separate video talking about all the various methods I use to help prevent rust around here, but basically it's just a spray-on waxy coating. All the parts we're using, obviously besides the shocks themselves, are either genuine BMW or the OE manufacturer. If we take a look at the sway bar end link, for example, you can see that we've got the BMW logo stamped here. And then on the OE part made by Lemforder, they grind off the BMW logo and resell the exact same part for a whole lot less. Even then, you still have to be careful because a lot of manufacturers, including Lemforder, are moving some of their production to China, so always pay attention to the markings on the part itself and the country of origin on the box or bag that it comes in. As you can see here, made in Slovakia, just like the genuine BMW part. Same thing for the strut mount, so we got Vibroacoustic and BMW. And on the new one, Vibroacoustic and BMW is ground off. Now that this one is fully disassembled, check this out. 2 fingers, I mean absolutely no resistance, versus the new one. Well, I think that speaks for itself, so let's get this thing assembled. New shock with new spring pad. Put the spring on and make sure it's lined up with the end of the spring pad. New dust boot. And the dust boot also acts as the upper spring pad, so you can see there's a stopper up here. Make sure that's lined up in the right place. Slide on the new bump stop. And now we'll lock in the spring compressor. Now the top mount is a bearing, so it goes on in any direction. Just slide it on and install the new nut. Torque down the top nut, you need one of these special tools. It's an open socket, so that way you can put a 6mm Allen as a counter hold. And tighten it like that. Now we can release the tension. One brand new assembly. All right, so now we're going to install the entire strut assembly back into the car. I put a new gasket on top here, and you might also notice that the shock looks a lot darker than it did before, and that's because I sprayed more of that Cosmoline all over the shock body as well. You might be saying, well, that seems kind of like overkill, but I would refer you to the rest of the car and you'd find out that it's definitely not. If you can see, I also sprayed some additional Cosmoline up top here. So now I'm going to put this up. And again, this is really a two-man job because you have to lift the shock up into place. And then from the top, you've got to put these bolts in. All right, let's see what we can do. Now I'm just going to use some shop air to spray out some of the dust and stuff that came down. That way none of it goes into the wheel bearing that we replaced a couple of months ago. Now I'm just going to add a bit of grease into the knuckle here where the shock slides in, just to make it a bit easier. So now since we kept the wishbone attached, we kind of just push this back up, get the axle lined up, and then push this down and into the shock. I'm going to put the knuckle spreader tool back in to slide this back on. There we go. On the back of the shock, you'll see this little tab here, and that needs to line up with the pinch in the knuckle. And I'm going to use my floor jack on the table to help push the knuckle back up. We push all the way up until it bottoms out. Now we'll take the spreader tool out. Brand new pinch bolt and nut. Put that right in. And then this is torqued to 44 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. New sway bar end link. And then it's torqued to 56 Newton meters. Little tip here, when you're working, don't do the same mistake I did. This ABS sensor wire is supposed to wrap in front of the shock. So rather than take all this out, I'm just going to unclip it from this box and repass. Basically, it just rides right along here. Another tip, if these connectors aren't sliding back on very good, just put a bit of silicone spray or whatever you have handy, and then it clips right in. Tie rod. Thrust arm. And you don't want to torque it down all the way just yet, because since this is a rubber bushing, you want to torque this at ride height. So I'm going to use the hydraulic table, jack up the knuckle, and now we can torque this down 100 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. Axle bolt. And then you just want to spin the axle a bit so that the splines in the axle line up with the splines in the wheel bearing. And then the way you're supposed to torque this down is with the second person inside putting his foot on the brake, but since I'm by myself, pin in the rotor and torque it down like this. Once the car is on the ground, these are torqued to 30 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. And there you go. We've got our brand new Koni Active strut assembly, brand new sway bar end link. A couple of months ago, we also replaced the thrust arm and the wheel bearing. So at this point, the only suspension components that are still original are the tie rod and the wishbone, and we'll get to those eventually. But for right now, there's a couple of other focus areas I want to work on. So let's start by doing the same thing on the other side. Moving on to the back here, you can see that I've done a real nice number on this wheel here. And if you can believe it or not, it's not self-inflicted from drifting. This is just general bad drivers on the road when it's snowy and slippery out who force me to swerve into a curb to avoid a collision. This thing is actually still holding air. I don't know how that's possible, but anyway, while we're working on the car, I'm gonna bring this to a shop and get it replaced. Now these shocks are one of my favorite designs because, as you can see, the bolts are from the bottom. So that means we don't have to go wasting time tearing apart the trunk to get these bolts out. We can do it right from underneath. And that's it. This pushes down right out of the way. Surprisingly, this shock actually isn't even blown. There's still a lot of resistance when I push down. But take a look at this top mount. I mean, it's completely wasted, and this was definitely the cause of all the clunking in the back of my car. First, we got to get this plastic aero duct out of the way, and you'll see there's 4 screws, but more often than not, yeah, already I can see that one is broken, but normally you're supposed to have 4. Since we're back here, there's actually a couple of other things we're going to tackle at the same time, besides just the shock. We're also going to do the sway bar end link like we did in the front, but we're also going to do this toe arm here and the lower control arm as well, and it has the camber adjustment here. What happens on these salt belt cars is that these 2 eccentric adjustment bolts just get completely seized up, and then when you bring your car to do an alignment, they say, okay, no problem, and they torch the shit out of them until they're red hot to break them free. More often than not, it'll work. The bolt will come free, but at the cost of the bushing inside, because now the bushing inside is totally shot, which is why these bushings are completely worn, but on the outside, they're still okay. I'll show you guys what I mean when these things come off. This is an 18mm nut and an E18 bolt. Now we can get this bolt out. And then the shock comes free. Now for the toe arm, this is an 18, and this should come free fairly easily. Yeah. Now, this is where the fun begins. So first I'm gonna turn off the lights so you guys can see when this thing starts to glow. Fire up my favorite tool, the Oxy torch. Goggles. Oxygen, and let's go. Okay, let's see what we can do. All right, now we got a counter hold in the back. Now be careful, don't touch that. It's a bit hard to see, but this is the E14 counter hold I was talking about. And now that this is broken free and not too hot, we can punch it from the other side. Well, I won't be touching that for the next little while. Same game for the camber bolt. Amateur move, I didn't have my socket ready. A bushing caught on fire. That's okay. Okay, so the nut came off, but the bolt didn't move, so this might still be seized. Amazing what a bit of heat can do. It's a good idea to make one full rotation to make sure there's no spots where there's still corrosion or it's still seized. Now just be careful, you don't want to punch this all the way out because we still have all the spring tension resting on this lower control arm. So first we got to let that down. So now we can get this toe arm out of the way. Here's that really nice looking bushing. And now to decompress the spring, I'm just gonna put a piece of wood here, jack up the hydraulic table to take the tension off, then we'll take the bolt out and slowly lower it down. And then this is a 21 millimeter bolt with a 21 millimeter counter hold. Normally you should always try and loosen from the nut side when possible, but there's not that much room here, so I'm gonna try for the bolt. Now we're going to slowly lower the table till there's no more tension on this bolt and we can punch it out, and then we can get the whole arm to just swing down. And now when we lower this down, the knuckle is going to stay hanging and this arm will just swing down. Get the spring out of here. Now we slide this bolt out. And we're all set. And again, look at this beautiful bushing. Oh mon Dieu. Last thing, we're just going to take off this sway bar end link. And since we're replacing this and I don't care about it, I'm just going to use some vice grips to grab onto this instead of trying to use the T30 counter hold in the middle. It'll be faster. And then this just needs a bit of persuasion here. We're all set. So again, just like the fronts, we've got everything we need for a brand new assembly. New mount, new bump stop, new gasket, and new hardware. Now you'll notice I have two different mounts here, and this is really important going back to my point previously about OE versus genuine parts. So this is supposedly the OE Lemforder part, but as soon as I took it out of the box, I knew that something kind of looked weird. If you don't have a lot of experience with parts, you might not notice it right away, but just right off the bat, the texture of the metal is wrong, and you can also see in different places there's kind of like these marks where it's been ground down. So you can tell that either the tooling or the dies themselves don't match very well. And when you compare that versus the genuine BMW part, then right away you can tell the difference. The color of the metal, the texture, and then even the casting marks. Like I said, if you check out this seam here, it's been ground down on this one. If you check inside, it doesn't have any of the same marks. So this is definitely not the OE part, even though if you check on the websites and Lemforder's information, this is supposedly the OE part made in the same factory. So what's the deal? After checking the box, you can see that the problem is right here, made in China. Now, I don't want to say that everything made in China is necessarily bad, but when it comes to German auto parts, there definitely is a quality difference. So like I said, Lemforder is moving a bunch of their production to China, so they're not necessarily the OE parts. So always inspect the part when it comes out of the box to make sure that it matches the one that came out of the car. In this case, since it's made in China, I don't really have confidence in the quality of it, so I purchased the genuine BMW part for much more. So at least I know this is the good part with the BMW logo made in Germany. Now assembly on this really couldn't be easier. Just take this top nut off, slide your new dust boot on, new mount. And same thing like the front, you need one of these fancy shock tools like this, so you can put the socket on and then still counter hold the Allen inside. This is torqued to 38 Newton meters. Then the bump stop just pushes up into the mount, that way it's not rattling around. New gasket goes on top, and then this plastic cap, there's a little pin that goes in the back here, slides in, and then clips onto the top. Just like that. And now we're all set, ready to go back in the car. Here we've got all the other brand new parts we're going to put back on the car. So everything is coated on the outside, and then all the bushing holes are also filled with anti-seize as well, just to try and give us a fighting chance. And both of these arms are the OE Lemforder parts made in Turkey. Now I'll put everything back in the reverse order, starting with the sway bar end link, just because it's a lot easier to do with, nothing in the way. This is the OE part made in Germany. And basically anything we touch, we're going to spray with some of this Cosmoline. And these are torqued to 56 Newton meters. The sway bar end link you can torque at any height because it's a ball joint and not a bushing. So now we can slide our new lower control arm in. I've also obviously got new hardware for everything. And then I'm going to put the new spring up into the car first, and then line it up with the end of the spring pad in the control arm. Now we can start jacking this up. So the bolt comes through on this back side that you can see, and then the nut is on the front side because there's a control arm in the way, and otherwise you wouldn't be able to fit the bolt on. And now we can gently let this down. Now we can slide the new toe arm in. And obviously, like I mentioned, we've got all new hardware. This stuff is really expensive, you know, these fancy eccentric bolts, weird things. I think this was probably like 15 bucks just for this one piece. Honestly, probably more. But when the hardware is in this condition, like when we removed it, really you have no choice. Replace it, otherwise the next time you do this, it's going to be seized again. Just in case that wasn't clear, I didn't actually torque these down. I just tightened them up, and then we'll torque everything down once the suspension is at ride height. Now, the last thing is to install the actual shock. And so to do that, I compress the shock to give us some more space. And then I tuck it into the control arm and then let it go up by itself. 3 brand new bolts. And then since this is a static part, it can be torqued at any height. It doesn't have to be on the ground. Now we just have to get this shock bolt in, but to do that, again, we have to lift the entire knuckle. So we're gonna do this, but at the same time, I'm gonna lift everything to ride height. That way we can torque down all these bushings. And then this bolt goes the opposite way of the camber bolt. So the bolt goes in from the front side of the car. And the nut goes on the back. So now we'll bring this all the way up to ride height. The camber arm, the knuckle bolt, is a 21 millimeter with a 21 millimeter nut. Normally I always recommend torquing from the nut side when possible, but there's one of these control arms in the way in the back, so it's easier if we torque it from the front. The toe arm, the wheel carrier bolt, is an 18 millimeter. The toe arm bolt is an E14 with an 18 millimeter nut. Now, you can see as I spin this, it moves, but I have no idea what position this thing is supposed to be in. So I'm gonna leave it however it sits, torque it down, and after this, we're driving straight to the alignment shop. Ideally, what you should do is you should mark the position of the eccentric washer with a marker. That way you can get it relatively in the same position. Either way though, if you touch these bolts, you'll need to go get an alignment. And this is torqued to 100 Newton meters. And lastly, we've got this camber arm eccentric bolt. It's an 18 millimeter bolt with a 21 millimeter nut, torqued to 165 Newton meters. And that's everything. So now we can slowly lower this back down. And there we go. Now last thing, we're just gonna put this aero cover back on the camber arm. And even I'm not crazy enough to torque these down, but if you want to, it's 4 Newton meters. All right, now on to the driving impressions. So I've actually had these installed on my car for the better part of a year by now. I installed them sometime in February and now we're in October. And in that time, I have done about 30,000+ kilometers on them, including a road trip from Montreal to California. So I've got a really good feel for how these ride. But first, I just want to mention something that a lot of people miss when comparing suspension, and it's the tires. So of course, a lot of people, they do a build, they do full new suspension, maybe you lower the car. Of course, you want to put new wheels and tires. The car looks a whole lot better. But what people are forgetting is that the wheels and tires make the same, if not an even bigger difference on the ride quality than the suspension will, depending on your setup. So just make sure you're doing an apples to apples comparison. In my case, I had run flats on for thousands of kilometers before, and I had run flats on for thousands of kilometers after. And now I actually even have regular tires, so I can really compare the difference. Now, if I had to summarize these Koni Special Actives in a single sentence, I would say that they are a lot more comfortable and a little bit more sporty. What do I mean by that? Well, in daily driving, especially around here in Montreal, where most of the roads are just horrible. Of course, now that I say that, I think I'm on the smoothest road, but the car is significantly more comfortable soaking up bumps without feeling bouncy or floaty. Then when you're on the back roads or you're on the twisties, maybe a big turn on the highway, you definitely notice the turn-in does feel a little bit tighter, and mid-corner bumps also bother you less. But I won't say that there's a drastic difference on the performance side when I'm comparing these. So if you're buying these for a more comfortable ride, go ahead, you'll be happy with them. I think a good word to describe it is premium feeling. But if you're buying this for a stiffer, more sporty ride, I would say look for something else because you won't be happy with these. I don't remember if I mentioned this anywhere in the video, but I stayed at stock ride height with stock springs. Now, Koni doesn't recommend using any type of lowering springs with these Koni FSD Special Actives, but I've seen a lot of builds where people do a mild drop on some H&R or iBox springs, and people are happy with it if that's what you're going for. Again, where I live, there's just too many potholes, the roads are just too rough. I think it's also good to mention that I've driven a lot of these F-Series, 3 Series cars with the standard, sport, and adaptive suspensions. My personal favorite is still the adaptive suspension, but that's not an easy retrofit. I mean, you need a new wiring harness, you need new modules, you got to do all kinds of coding. That's out of scope for 99% of people. With these, it cost me less than $1,000 to do all of this work, and it made a significant difference that I am really happy with. The change from run flats to regular tires also made a huge difference on ride quality. Obviously, the regular tires are a lot more comfortable, but the run flats actually, with their thick, stiff sidewalls on the highway, it actually does feel a little bit tighter. Now, I still prefer regular tires, and I'm pretty sure everyone does. They just cost a lot less and ride better in, 90% of circumstances. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned because after a bit of a break over the last few months, I've got a lot of great videos coming. I've got M Sport blue brake calipers, and of course the question that everyone always asks me, Project 335i wagon. I promise there will be an update before the end of the year. Thanks, guys.